Welcome to the Angus Report. I'm your host, Clint Mefford, and we're bringing you the latest cattle news and education. This week we're discussing alternative proteins. Proper nutrition during gestation can have significant effects on carcass quality, and we visit Ballindalloch Castle in Scotland to learn about the birth of the Angus breed. This is the Angus Report. Alternative proteins have been gaining interest as food-based biotechs continue to introduce new products into the marketplace. Rodrigo Tarte, an animal science professor at Iowa State University, defines some of those alternative proteins and dives deeper into the new development of cell-cultured meat.
Well, for alternative proteins, meaning meat alternative proteins, we have fundamentally three sources. They can come from plants, and those are typically your soy-based or wheat-based, gluten-based. Pea protein is another one that's become popular recently. So those are plant-based sources. Then you have fungi. Popular product out there called corn, which comes from a mold that's grown in fermentation vessels, and then they transform that into consumer products. And then there are also other alternative animal proteins. For example, insect protein is one of those that is picking up steam. Very small industry yet, but it's picking up steam here and in other countries as well. And then, of course, there's cell-cultured meat, which even though it wouldn't need an animal to grow, it does need to originate from a live animal. Cell-cultured meat, or also known as in vitro meat, is basically a synthetic product that originates from stem cells that are obtained from a live animal, so through a biopsy. And those are then grown with the appropriate growth factors in basically about large bioreactors. And after so many replications, then they are harvested, and then they're turned, ideally they will be turned into consumer products. Right now it's kind of at the research type stage. I'm sure the companies that work in this space are working on scale-up.
Tarte explains some of the challenges associated with cell-cultured meat production.
Some of the issues that could turn out to be issues are the use of live animals to biopsy. It's still to be determined how many animals would that really take. It is important to understand that right now these cells are not immortal. So you put this in these vessels and they're going to grow and they're going to replicate only so much, and then they're going to die off, and then you have to go back to a live animal, take another biopsy and bring those in. So that is one challenge. Secondly is the growth factors for growth of these cells right now come from fetal calf serum. As the name implies, fetal calf serum needs to come from calf fetuses. A third issue is anybody who's done cell culture work knows that keeping the culture sterile is paramount. And the moment that you get bacteria or other organisms that are going to grow a lot faster, contaminate your culture, you're going to lose it very fast. So right now, they are using antibiotics to do this. And this is something that they need to, that I see as from a marketing point of view, they need to probably find a way to produce this without the use of antibiotics if it's going to have any hope of competing, I think, with conventional meat products. There's been a recent study, and it came out a couple of months ago, where they modeled several systems of producing cell culture meat, and their overall conclusions are that it may be advantageous in the near term, but not necessarily in the long term. There will be CO2 emissions associated with cell culture meat production. Again, we don't know how much because it hasn't been done commercially. And one thing to remember is CO2 persists in the atmosphere a lot longer than methane. Methane is believed to persist in the atmosphere about 11, 12, 13 years, versus CO2, we're talking about 80 years or so. And in terms of water usage, right now, one estimate that I've seen, to get 1 kilogram of cell-cultured muscle cells would require about a 500-liter bioreactor. Presumably, majority of that would be water. So if you extrapolate this to billions of pounds of product, it could be significant water usage.
Current consumer preferences are based on more natural, organically produced foods. Cell-cultured meat falls on the opposite side of that spectrum, which creates competing interests and food preference values.
This is very interesting technology because it's predicated on the fact that we won't need to kill animals for food, right? And many other consumers feel very strongly about that. On the other side, you can obviate the fact that it's very synthetic. And So it's artificial as they come, even if the product were to turn out to be similar to meat. And so, how are consumers who are looking for the natural, organic, non-GMO going to react to a product that does satisfy one of the moral imperatives, which is the use of animals for food, but at the same time, it's not going to be able to satisfy all those other ones. So this is going to may force some consumers into a trade-off. I see, trade-off, of all the things that all your belief systems, which are the ones you're willing to compromise on and which are the ones you're going to stand on. Right now, the play here is the ethical aspects of using animals for food, and also the environmental impact of animal agriculture is also what's been discussed as a potential benefit of cell culture meat. Having said that, though, however, it's important to understand that because we don't know what commercial cell culture meat production is going to look like, at least us, general public, we don't know that. Some of the companies that are working in this space, they may have some idea already. Once that comes out, there needs to be a complete life cycle assessment done on this technology to really validate, is it really that much more advantageous? What are the greenhouse gas emissions, the environmental impact of this technology as compared to traditional livestock production? So that's also a TBD, and so we should not make the assumption that it's necessarily going to be better. I'd like to see that happen someday, and it'll have to happen. But the first thing they have to do is they have to commercialize, they have to scale it up, commercialize it, and then go in and do that life cycle assessment.
Right now, the estimate for the entire meat substitute market is a $3.7 billion industry and is expected to grow at a 7.5% rate year over year for the next 6 or 7 years. While it is a small market now, it has the potential to become significantly larger in the near future. Visit policy.ncba.org for up-to-date information on the development of cell-cultured meat. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more Angus Report after a break.
The American Angus Association Board of Directors approved changes to the dollar value indexes this spring. Changes include revisions to beef value, the addition of maternal value, rounding all dollar values to whole dollars to eliminate decimals, and the elimination of quality grade and yield grade. These updates will be implemented May 31st of this year. A yet-to-be-named combined index, which combines both dollar maternal and dollar beef, is set to be implemented in June 2020. However, the formula for calculating the combined index will be released May 31st of 2019. Morgan Fruget of Jennings, Louisiana, has been announced as the 2019 Talon Youth Education Learning Program intern. She is currently a junior at McNeese State University, pursuing a degree in animal science. Fruget will spend the summer interning with Henning Farms in Janesville, Wisconsin. The Talon Youth Education Learning Program internship is the legacy of the late Cam Cooper of Talon Ranch in Twin Bridges, Montana. The internship pairs motivated Angus youth with registered Angus breeders to provide valuable education and work experience for a summer. The internship program is open to college sophomores, juniors, seniors, graduate students, and recent college graduates who are under the age of 25 and are majoring in an agricultural field of study. The American Angus Association is proud to present the first documentary film to expose the impact of urban sprawl in American agriculture, Losing Ground. The documentary, which will premiere on RFD TV on May 27th, features industry experts and Angus breeders from across the country. Losing Ground will be released on YouTube after the national broadcast. Subscribe to Angus TV to view the film once it's been released.
We check in now on the latest cattle market news with the Cattle Facts Update.
Hello, and welcome to the Cattle Facts Update. I'm Troy Bockelman. The corn situation is bigger available stocks for old crop and potential for bigger supplies in new crop as well. First, in looking at old crop corn supply, corn stocks on March 1st, 2019 was estimated at 8.6 billion bushels. Well down 3% from a year ago, still the third largest on record and well above industry expectations. Exports and ethanol have been showing signs of weakened demand, and this has placed more corn on the market than earlier expectations. The USDA also reduced feed and residual 100 million bushels lower to near year-ago levels due to corn stocks bigger than expected. In the April WASDE, corn stocks to use for the old crop market year increased from 12.4% to 14%. Now on to new crop prospects. The USDA prospective planting report was released the end of March, and corn acreage was up 4% at 92.8 million acres. Corn acres exceeded industry expectations, yet reductions in acres are possible as the survey was completed before the spring flooding that occurred in the western Corn Belt. A long, wet winter may also limit the ability to get the crop in the ground in time, and producers may be inclined to switch the expected crops planted. As a result, expect changes in acreage when the official numbers are released. Seasonally, the corn market rallies into the spring and summertime. With increased supplies, futures have trended lower and the typical seasonal rally has not yet occurred. One way to get the spring rally underway is money flow. Currently, the managed money short is near record large, and a liquidation of this position will likely push the market higher. Corn planting is just starting, and as of Sunday, April 14th, U.S. corn planting is 3% complete, steady with a year ago, yet below the 5-year average of 5%. It'll be important to watch weather and the corn planting pace, as this can be a trigger which should signal the shorts in the market to move their position and cause the seasonal rally to start. For the Angus Report and Cattle Facts, I'm Troy Bockelman.
To learn more about Cattle Facts, your leading source for beef industry market information, visit cattlefacts.com.
Next on the Angus Report, we discuss fetal programming with a South Dakota State University professor. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Fetal programming is the concept the gestational environment can impact the lifetime outcomes of offspring. Those outcomes might include health, reproductive traits, or even meat quality. Amanda Blair, a meat science professor at South Dakota State University, discusses the significance of fetal programming by putting into perspective the amount of time a fed steer spends his life in utero.
When I actually did the math of this, it's a little bit eye-opening. So if we think about a feedlot steer and think about what % of its life it's spent in gestation. So just a quick example, if we have a feedlot steer that we slaughter at 15 months of age, 15 months of age postnatally plus 9 months or so in gestation equals about 24 months. So if we take that as a percentage, they're actually spending almost 40% of their life in gestation. So that's 40% of their life that, the cow-calf producer, might forget about, or the feedlot guy might not give consideration to how that is being handled during that time point, but it has a huge impact because we know that there's environmental pressures that can affect expression of genes and ultimately change the phenotype or the outcome of that individual. While I might think two tissues like muscle and fat are hugely important, in the grand scheme for a developing fetus, they really rank pretty low in terms of importance to the viability of that fetus. So the vital organs such as the brain, the heart, the lungs are definitely going to get preference for those nutrients, and other tissues could be differentially harmed by any type of restriction. So a lot of times in severe restrictions, we actually see increased weights of different organs like the brain or the heart in relation to the body weight, just showing that it's going to support those vital organs many times at the detriment to those other tissues.
Blair notes that when all is right, however, organs and the first muscle cells form at the same time.
Really, that mid-gestation time point is where we see a lot of development of muscle and fat tissues, which is ultimately going to be converted into meat. So when we think about, feeding steers or feeding heifers, those things that happen gestationally could really set those animals up for having, potentially more muscle fibers or more fat cells that could be in that marbling depot. So we've been excited about doing some changes to maternal diets to see if we could inflict changes ultimately to that carcass composition and meat quality. Muscle cell development really is initiated early in gestation with what we call primary muscle fibers. And those primary muscle fibers are a small pool, but they really act as a scaffolding for the secondary fibers to develop on or around. And it's really the secondary fibers that make up the bulk of the muscle mass of the individual. One key point that we try to note to producers is something to think about is that muscle cell development ends sometime in mid-gestation, or at the end of mid-gestation or early and late gestation. So essentially, that fiber number is set. We don't get any more. So humans and cattle and other domestic livestock species are born with the number of muscle fibers that they're ever going to have. We can make them bigger, and that happens at the end of gestation in the last trimester where we see a lot of hypertrophy or growth of those fibers, but we can't ever make more. So again, if there's any kind of an insult that's going to occur at mid-gestation, that theoretically could lead to decreases in the total number of muscle fibers, which is going to result in, we think, changes in things like ribeye area or, total hot carcass weight. Fat works a bit differently. It starts to develop in very end of early gestation and through mid-gestation and late gestation, but those fat cells can and do continue to develop postnatally.
Any kind of insult that occurs mid-gestation could affect the number of those fat cells and potentially the distribution of them in the carcass. This could ultimately affect marbling ability and quality grade. These are things to consider when looking at a year-round cow herd nutrition program.
Because a lot of times I think we don't really think about what's going on developmentally of that fetus. We're more interested in getting that cow bred or looking at the calf at her side at different times during the year. And we tend to forget, especially in early and mid-gestation, that there's a lot of development going on and that restrictions or limitations to the nutrients that are coming to that fetus can actually have an impact. So with that awareness, we hope that, you can kind of help producers kind of stay out of the ditches. We've done some research at South Dakota State University looking at different nutrients. We've looked at everything from restricting energy to restricting protein, specifically metabolizable protein. We've also looked at mineral nutrition. So I think, and there's researchers across the country that are kind of honing in on specific nutrients because we think that they may differentially impact some of those outcomes. So I think that that's something that producers should definitely keep an eye on. We say restriction, but that broadly maybe doesn't mean the same thing if we're talking about different nutrients. And there are some global studies that look at, protein and energy, but it's important if you are evaluating some research in this area to really dig down and look at what type of restriction or overfeeding situation, if that's the case, what nutrient are they actually supplying. If we really think about a cow in production, she should really never be eating just for herself. At different times during the year, she's hopefully either gestating and lactating, and there really should be no time that she's not just eating for herself. She should be supporting 1 or 2 calves at different points during gestation and lactation. So, if she is ever eating for herself, she probably shouldn't be around anymore. She should be in the cull pen.
Ongoing research looks to uncover specific management tactics to help improve muscle cell development. Up next, we head to Scotland to visit the oldest Angus herd in the world. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Angus Report. In a tale as old as the Angus breed itself, Ballindalloch Castle has sustained a herd of Angus cattle for nearly 5 centuries. Now widely known as the oldest Angus herd in the world, the herd is still managed by descendants of George McPherson Grant.
It was my great-grandfather who started the first Aberdeen Angus herd with 2 other great agriculturists, Watson of Keeler and McCombie, and my great-grandfather. And it was they who bred the Aberdeen Angus together, and they produced the first pedigree Aberdeen Angus in 1860.
We obviously have quite a lot of records going back, late 1850s, early 1860s, and you've had the work of Watson and McCombie. Credit where credit's due, they had done a lot of the initial codifying of the breed, I guess. Sir George McPherson Grant took the breed and really went out and promoted it, showed at various exhibitions globally, most important of which was the
Paris show. I think it was 1870, I'm not absolutely certain, but he did a lot of showing and probably, as they say now, making a brand out of the Aberdeen Angus.
So Sir George McPherson Grant, my great-great-grandfather, can be applauded for both making the right choice of breed, but also then taking the breed global.
Australia, New Zealand, South America, America, Canada, and it all started from this little area in Scotland. Ballindalloch was built in 1546, and it's been added on to, of course, in other times, as they always did. And my family have been there since.
I think for me one of the challenges is to work out where we go in the future. Many businesses is a question of, well, what do we want to do? You know, many options are open. Here we have those decades, generations of responsibility to keep the Angus going. My mother has a fine eye for cattle, and she works with David to make the decisions on the farm as to what we keep, what we don't keep, and where we want to go.
The Angus cattle are the love of my life. I've been at Ballindalloch, as I said, since I was 5 years old, and since then they've always been out all summer in the cúchach, or the cow's meadow, and I used to go and talk to them most days. So I have a huge interest in the cattle. We had a wonderful cattleman for 48 years. Then there was a sort of moment that we didn't have such good cattle. David Johnson came into our lives and his family, and since then we have gone right up. Of course, David Johnson has a wonderful eye for cattle, and he has made the Ballindalloch herd over the last 8 years.
Well, welcome to Ballindalloch. It's a lovely setting in the heart of Speyside here. We like to think we've got a nice Angus herd, and it's a great privilege actually to be in charge of the oldest Aberdeen Angus herd in the world in continuous existence. Why Angus? Oh well, I've worked with two different herds of Aberdeen Angus cattle before. I worked with the Fair Oaks herd in Inverness and the Cardona herd in Stirling, and I've always found them very easy to work with. White cattle, very easy fleshed, easy calving, which means a lot nowadays. There's not the same stuff about, so the easier the cattle are to work with. We try and keep our cattle not too big an animal. We're very conscious of what an Aberdeen Angus set out to be. We're like an animal that's grass fed, easy finished, easy fleshed, easy calved. So one of the main things that we try and keep a lot of attention to is the head of the animal. We like a nice Angus head, and we normally think if you get the head right, the rest of the animal will follow. Not everybody agrees with that. A lot of folks say the head ends up on the slaughterhouse floor, but to us as a breeder, it's breed character. It is a great honour. You know, there's only one person can say that. In the field we're standing in now, you could probably say there's been Aberdeen Angus cattle in this field since 1860, really, and hopefully I think they will be here for a long time to come too. It means a lot to the family themselves. So hopefully I can keep up the work and keep the thing going for them.
It was nice to visit the longest standing Angus operation in the world. And that's a wrap for this week's Angus Report. Tune in next week for industry-leading news and education. And as per usual, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Angus TV, for more highlights from the association. We'll see you next week.